During World War II, 40% of all vegetables consumed in America came from victory gardens, small plots of land where ordinary families grew their own food to support the war effort and feed themselves when grocery stores were running empty. Today, we face a different kind of crisis, one where food prices have doubled in 5 years, where supply chains collapse overnight, and where the average family spends over $10,000 a year on groceries that could be grown in their own backyard for a fraction of that cost. Here is how to build a modern victory garden using the principles that John Seymour spent decades perfecting. A system that can feed your family all year long from a plot as small as 100 square feet. The foundation of any victory garden is not the seeds you plant or the space you have, but the fertility of your soil, because everything that grows above ground depends entirely on what is happening below it. John Seymour believed that soil is the bank where all future harvests are stored, and the first deposit you make into that bank determines whether you will be rich or poor when it comes time to harvest. Most modern gardens fail because they treat soil like dirt, something inert that just holds plants upright. When in reality, soil is a living ecosystem containing billions of microorganisms, fungi, bacteria, and invertebrates that work together to break down organic matter and make nutrients available to plant roots. Here is the real secret. You do not feed the plants, you feed the soil, and the soil feeds the plants. The fastest way to build soil fertility is through composting, which means taking all your kitchen scraps, garden waste, fallen leaves, grass clippings, and animal manure, if you have it, and piling it together in a heap where it will decompose into dark, crumbly humus that smells like forest floor and feels like chocolate cake. A good compost pile needs four things: carbon-rich brown materials like dry leaves and straw, nitrogen-rich green materials like fresh grass and vegetable scraps, moisture to keep the microorganisms active, and oxygen to prevent the pile from turning anaerobic and smelling like death. Turn your compost pile every 2 weeks. Keep it as moist as a wrung-out sponge. And within 3 to 6 months, you will have finished compost that you can spread over your garden beds at a depth of 2 to 4 inches, which will transform even the worst clay or sand into productive soil. If you have chickens or rabbits, their manure is pure gold for the garden, containing high levels of nitrogen that plants need for leafy growth. But it must be composted first because fresh manure is too hot and will burn plant roots. A victory garden is not about aesthetics or ornamental plants. It is about producing the maximum amount of food from the minimum amount of space, which means every square foot must be planned with intention. The deep bed method is the most productive system ever developed for small space gardening, where instead of planting in long rows with wide walkways between them, you create raised beds 4 feet wide and as long as you need, filled with deeply worked soil that is never compacted by foot traffic. 4 feet is the magic number because it allows you to reach the center of the bed from either side without stepping on the soil. And once you build these beds and fill them with compost, you never walk on them again, which means the soil stays loose and aerated and plant roots can penetrate deep without resistance. In a deep bed, you can plant much more densely than in traditional rows, spacing plants in offset patterns where each plant occupies the center of a hexagon formed by its 6 neighbors, which means you can fit 2 to 3 times more plants in the same space. And the mature leaves will form a living mulch that shades out weeds and conserves moisture. Now, this is the game changer. In a well-designed victory garden, you eliminate all permanent walkways and dedicate 90% of your space to actual growing area, compared to conventional gardens where 50 to 60% of the space is wasted on paths. Not all vegetables are created equal when it comes to victory gardens because some crops produce enormous amounts of food from very little space, while others take up huge areas and give you almost nothing in return. The backbone of any victory garden should be potatoes, which can produce 10 to 15 pounds of food per square foot if grown using the deep planting or mulch method, and which store for 6 to 8 months in a cool, dark place, making them the ultimate survival crop. Beans, both bush and pole varieties, are essential because they fix nitrogen from the air through symbiotic bacteria in their root nodules, which means they actually improve your soil while producing protein-rich food. And pole beans in particular can climb up vertical supports and produce for months from just a few square feet of ground space. Tomatoes are incredibly productive if you choose indeterminate varieties that keep growing and fruiting until frost. And a single plant can produce 20 to 30 pounds of fruit over a season if you stake it properly and keep it well watered. Winter squash and pumpkins are space hogs. Yes, but they produce massive amounts of calories and store for months without refrigeration, and you can train them to grow up trellises or let them sprawl over areas where nothing else is growing. Leafy greens like kale, chard, lettuce, and spinach are fast-growing, nutrient-dense, and can be harvested continuously using the cut and come-again method, where you take outer leaves and let the center keep producing. Root vegetables like carrots, beets, turnips, and radishes make excellent use of vertical space below ground and can be succession planted every 2 weeks to ensure a continuous harvest from spring through fall. And here's the part nobody tells you. Perennial vegetables like asparagus, rhubarb, and Jerusalem artichokes require almost no maintenance once established and will produce food for 10 to 20 years from a single planting, which means they are the ultimate long-term investment in food security. The biggest mistake most gardeners make is planting everything at once in spring and then watching their garden sit empty for 10 months of the year, when the whole point of a victory garden is to produce food continuously from the same space. Succession planting means sowing small amounts of fast-maturing crops every 2 to 3 weeks throughout the growing season, so that as one planting is harvested, the next one is already growing and will be ready in a few weeks. Lettuce, radishes, spinach, and turnips all mature in 30 to 60 days, which means you can get 3 to 5 harvests from the same bed between spring and fall if you keep replanting as soon as one crop is finished. Relay planting means starting your next crop before the current one is harvested, so there is never a gap in production, like planting lettuce seedlings between rows of peas in late spring, so that when the peas are finished in early summer, the lettuce is already established and ready to take over that space. Interplanting means growing fast-maturing crops like radishes or lettuce between slow-growing crops like tomatoes or cabbage, so that the fast crop is harvested and gone before the slow crop needs the space. Season extension using cold frames, row covers, and hoop houses allows you to start planting 4 to 6 weeks earlier in spring and keep harvesting 4 to 6 weeks later in fall, which in many climates means you can grow food 9 to 10 months of the year instead of just 4 to 5. So now you have soil fertility, space-efficient design, high-yield crops, and succession planting working together. Here is where it all comes together with the final principle that makes a victory garden truly self-sufficient. A victory garden reaches its full potential when you integrate small livestock like chickens or rabbits, which convert kitchen scraps and garden waste into high-quality protein and the best fertilizer you can get. 3 chickens in a small run attached to your garden will give you nearly 1,000 eggs per year. Produce enough manure to fertilize 100 square feet of garden beds and eat all your kitchen scraps, weeds, and garden pests, creating a closed loop where nothing is wasted and everything cycles back into the system. Rabbits are even more space efficient, producing 5 to 6 pounds of meat every 8 weeks from a hutch that takes up just 4 square feet, and their manure can go directly onto the garden without composting because it is cold manure that will not burn plants. The key insight is that animals transform waste into value, taking things you would otherwise throw away and converting them into eggs, meat, and fertilizer, which means your victory garden becomes not just a source of vegetables, but a complete food production system. Putting it all together, when you transition to this system, the $10,000 your family spends on groceries every year becomes $2,000 spent on seeds, compost materials, and a few chickens. And the difference is not just financial, it is about resilience, about knowing that no matter what happens to supply chains or food prices, you have the ability to feed yourself. A modern victory garden is not about going back to the past. It is about taking the wisdom that kept people alive during the hardest times in history and applying it to the challenges we face today. Start small, build your soil, choose productive crops, plant in succession, and if possible, integrate animals. The original victory gardens were born out of necessity during wartime, but today they represent something even more important: the ability to take control of your own food supply and build true independence in an increasingly uncertain world. This is not nostalgia. This is survival. And the time to start is now. Not when the crisis arrives, but before it does. When you still have the luxury of learning from mistakes and building systems that will sustain you for years to come. If this story changes the way you look at the soil in your backyard, please subscribe and like the channel. We are unearthing the history and methods they tried to bury. Plant your future today. The next treasure trove of knowledge will open soon.